The chandeliers trembled first, then the silence fell. A billionaire's son had just humiliated a waiter in front of Seoul's elite, certain no one would dare answer him. Then she stepped forward, calm, unshaken, dangerous in her stillness. Neither of them knew that a single glass of wine was about to unravel an empire, awaken a heart that had gone cold for years, and change both their lives forever. Welcome to Unfold Korean Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe, telling me where you are watching from. The silver crane sat at the top of Cheongdamdong like a crown balanced on the city's head. Its windows overlooked the Han River, its wine cellar held bottles older than the country's constitution, and its reservation list was rumored to have turned away 2 former prime ministers. People did not eat here. They performed here: the right suit, the right laugh, the right silence at the right moment. Amara Okafor had worked there for 4 months, and in that time she had learned the restaurant's real menu: who to fear, who to flatter, and who to simply survive. She was 26, Nigerian-born, raised partly in London, with a linguistics degree she'd never used and a sommelier's palate she'd built herself, bottle by bottle, on a waitress's salary. None of the guests knew that. To them she was simply the tall foreign woman with the steady hands and the accent they couldn't quite place. That evening, the private dining room on the 3rd floor had been reserved for the Baek family. Amara didn't know yet that the reservation would end her ordinary life. The doors opened at exactly 7, and Baek Do-hyun walked in first, the heir apparent to Baek Construction, 29 years old, dressed in a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than the restaurant paid her in a year. He moved like a man who had never once been told no and had stopped expecting to hear it. Behind him came his father's business partners, murmuring about a groundbreaking ceremony scheduled for the following week, a luxury development that would replace an entire block of family-owned shops in Itaewon. Amara caught fragments of the conversation as she poured water: eviction notices, expedited permits, a mayor's office that had been handled. She said nothing. It wasn't her place to react to what she overheard, it never was. Do-hyun snapped his fingers before he'd even sat down. Someone competent, not whoever they sent last time. The floor manager, a nervous man named Suh, gestured for Amara. She approached with her notepad already out, her expression arranged into the practiced calm that 4 months of fine dining had taught her. "Good evening, sir. I'll be taking care of your table tonight." Do-hyun looked her over the way he might examine a chair before deciding whether to sit in it. "You're not Korean." "No, sir." "Then how am I supposed to trust your wine recommendations?" He said it lightly, but the men around him laughed on cue, the way men always laughed when someone with money made a joke at someone without it. "You could taste them, sir, before you decide whether to trust me," Amara said. A beat of silence. One of the older men, silver-haired, quiet, seated slightly apart from the rest at the end of the table, glanced up from his glass for the first time. He said nothing, but he was listening now. Do-hyun didn't notice. "Bring the 08 latour," he said, waving a hand, "and don't embarrass yourself trying to explain it to me." Amara inclined her head and left the room. In the service corridor, Suh caught her arm, his face pale. "Do you know who that is? His father is Baek Sang-chul. They could buy this restaurant with what they spend on watches." "I know," Amara said. "I'm still going to do my job." Miguel, the oldest server on staff, shook his head as she passed. "Careful with that one. Money like that doesn't like being corrected, ever." She said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. She had learned long ago that the people who told you to shrink yourself were rarely the ones who had to. She returned with the bottle, presented the label, and poured with the unhurried precision that had taken her 2 years of study to make look effortless. Do-hyun swirled his glass without looking at it, more interested in his phone. "This is corked," he announced, not tasting it. Amara paused. She had opened that bottle herself not 90 seconds earlier, and the seal had been perfect. "May I check, sir?" "I said it's corked." His voice sharpened, aware now that people at other tables in the open section beyond the glass partition had turned to look. "Are you telling me I don't know a corked wine when I taste one, or is taste too advanced a concept for the help?" The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when they sense a performance is about to begin. "I'd never suggest that, sir," Amara said evenly. "I only meant that if the bottle is flawed, I'd like to replace it properly rather than assume. May I smell the cork?" He shoved the cork across the tablecloth toward her like he was flicking away an insect. Amara lifted it, inhaled once, calm and unbothered. "This has no taint, sir. It smells of cedar and blackcurrant exactly as a poilac from that vintage should. If there's a flavor you're not enjoying, it may simply be young tannin. The 08 needs another few years or a decant. Are you correcting me? Do-hyun's voice rose, delight creeping into the anger now, the particular thrill of a man who has found something small to destroy in front of an audience. In front of my father's partners, do you understand what you are? You pour water, you carry plates, you do not have opinions at my table. The silver-haired man at the end of the table set down his chopsticks very quietly. His eyes moved to Amara, sharp and assessing, though his face gave away nothing. I understand my role, sir, Amara said, her voice not rising to meet his. It's to serve you well. That includes being honest when honesty helps you enjoy what you paid for. Honest? Do-hyun laughed, short and ugly. You think your opinion is worth something because you memorized a few French words? You're a maid with a wine key. Go back to Nigeria and correct someone there. Silverware stopped moving. Even the pianist 2 floors below seemed to falter, though of course he couldn't have heard. Amara felt the words land somewhere deep and old, a place worn smooth by a lifetime of small cruelties disguised as jokes. She did not flinch. She had promised herself, the day she took this job, that she would never again let a room decide her worth for her. I'll bring a fresh bottle and let it breathe an hour before your entree, sir, she said, and turned to leave, spine straight, tray steady. I didn't dismiss you, Do-hyun snapped. No, sir, Amara said, not turning back. But I have other tables who deserve my attention tonight. She heard his chair scrape as she reached the door, heard him start to rise, start to say something else, and heard, too, the silver-haired man's voice, low and unhurried, cutting through the room for the first time that night. Do-hyun, sit down. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Something in the tone made even the junior executives at the table go still, and Do-hyun, mid-motion, sat. Amara didn't know the voice belonged to Kwon Hyun-woo, a man whose name opened doors in rooms Do-hyun's father hadn't even heard of. She only knew from the corridor that the temperature of the room had changed and that whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. She didn't think about the exchange again until nearly midnight, when the private room had emptied and she was stacking glasses in the service pantry, her feet aching in the particular way that came from an 11-hour shift. Miguel found her there. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish, he said. Ask me tomorrow which one it turns out to be. Amara managed a tired smile. That man at the end of the table, Miguel said, lowering his voice. The quiet one, you know who that was? No. Kwon Hyun-woo? Miguel said the name like it should mean something, and when her face stayed blank, he sighed. You really are new here. He owns half the investment funds that finance places like this. He doesn't talk much. When he does, people listen, even Baek Sang-chul listens, and Baek Sang-chul doesn't listen to anyone. Amara filed the name away without much interest and went home in the rain, replaying not Kwon Hyun-woo's quiet authority but Do-hyun's voice, go back to Nigeria, turning it over the way you press a bruise to check if it still hurts. It did. It would for a while. But she had learned, over years of being underestimated in 3 different countries, that the hurt didn't have to become the ending. 3 days later, Do-hyun returned. He arrived without warning, without his father's partners, trailing only 2 friends who laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny. Amara saw him from across the dining room and felt her stomach tighten, not with fear exactly, but with the particular fatigue of knowing a fight wasn't finished. Sa appeared at her elbow, sweating faintly. He requested you specifically. Requested me. By name, Sa looked as confused as she felt. Table 12. She approached with her notepad, calm restored to her face by long practice. Good evening, sir. Do-hyun looked up, and something in his expression was different tonight. Not the open contempt of before, but something colder, more deliberate, like a man who had spent 3 days constructing a trap and was pleased to see the prey walk into it on its own. You, he said, I want to see if the other night was luck. I'm not sure I understand, sir. Test me, he said, leaning back, gesturing at the wine list with theatrical generosity. Pick something, tell me what it is. Blind. If you're wrong, you apologize to my friends here for embarrassing me last time. If you're right, he shrugged, as if the possibility barely registered as real, I'll leave a very generous tip and never bother you again. His friends laughed. It was a game to them, the way it is always a game to people for whom losing costs nothing. Amara considered walking away. She considered telling Sa she felt ill. But something in her, the same something that had made her study wine on her days off for 2 years, that had made her memorize the appellations of Burgundy on crowded subway rides, that had never once let her believe the years she'd spent building quiet expertise were wasted, made her set down the tray instead. "All right," she said. Do-hyun's smile widened. He signaled a passing server, murmured something, and a bottle appeared already decanted into a plain carafe, its label hidden. He poured a taste into a glass and slid it toward her, delighted with himself. Amara lifted the glass. She didn't rush. She held it to the light first, deep garnet, slightly browning at the rim, the mark of some age. She swirled once, inhaled slowly, closed her eyes for half a second longer than necessary. "Cabernet-based," she said. "Old world, not new. The acidity's too structured, too restrained for California or Australia. The tannins are fully resolved, so we're looking at somewhere between 15 and 20 years of age. There's a dusty graphite note under the dark fruit that I associate with the gravel soils of the left bank Medoc, likely Poilac or St. Julian again, though this one's rounder, less austere than the latter from the other night. If I had to guess a producer, I'd say something from the second growth tier, structured enough to be serious, but with a softness that suggests careful blending rather than pure Cabernet Sauvignon dominance. My guess is a 2004 or 2005 vintage, St. Julian, second growth." She set the glass down. The table had gone quiet. Do-hyun's friend, the one holding the bottle behind his back, turned it over slowly, checking the label, his face changing in increments, amusement draining into something closer to alarm. He set it on the table without a word. The label read, Chateau Leoville Las Cases 2005 St. Julian. Second growth 2005 St. Julian. Do-hyun stared at the bottle, then at her, his jaw working. You could have heard someone talking about it. Someone could have told you what was on the menu tonight. "I've been at your table for 90 seconds, sir," Amara said quietly. "No one has told me anything. You poured it yourself." The friend who'd been holding the bottle laughed, a short, surprised, involuntary sound, quickly swallowed when Do-hyun's glare cut toward him. "Beginner's luck," Do-hyun muttered. "Perhaps," Amara said. "Would you like to test it again, sir?" It wasn't a challenge. Her voice stayed level, professional, almost gentle, which somehow made it land harder than any raised voice could have. Do-hyun's face went through several colors before settling on a flat, furious red. "Get out," he said. "I don't need your commentary." "Of course, sir." Amara bowed slightly and withdrew, and did not allow herself to smile until she was safely behind the kitchen doors. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't know for another 2 weeks, was that Kwon Hyun-woo had been seated at a corner table that night, alone, a newspaper folded beside his plate that he wasn't reading, watching the entire exchange over the rim of his glasses with the particular stillness of a man filing something away for later use. He had not come to the Silver Crane by accident. He rarely did anything by accident. He had, in fact, requested this exact seating on both occasions and had quietly instructed the maitre d' never to mention it. The story of the wine should have ended there. It didn't. Do-hyun, humiliated twice in the same restaurant by the same waitress, did what small, wounded men in positions of power often do. He made it personal. Within the week, whispers began moving through the Beek family's circle that the African waitress at the Silver Crane had been rude to a client, had made a scene, had overstepped. None of it was true, but truth had never been the currency that mattered in rooms like that one. Suh called Amara into his office on a Tuesday afternoon, his face apologetic in the particular way of a man who knows he's about to do something he doesn't believe in. "There's been a complaint," he said, "from the Beek family about your conduct." "What conduct?" "They said you were disrespectful, argumentative, that you embarrassed a guest in front of business associates." Suh wouldn't meet her eyes. "Corporate wants to know if we should let you go before Beek Construction decides to take their events elsewhere." Amara felt something in her chest go very still and very cold. She had spent 4 months building a life in this city out of exactly this kind of quiet dignity, arriving early, staying late, learning a language, a culture, a craft that no one had asked her to learn, because she believed stubbornly in the old lesson her mother had taught her before she died, that excellence was the one language every closed door eventually had to answer to. "I did my job," she said. "I told the truth when he asked me to. I was polite every time he wasn't." "I believe you," Suh said quietly. "But belief doesn't pay the restaurant's insurance on a groundbreaking ceremony contract worth 11 billion won." She left his office with her hands shaking, though her face, out of long habit, stayed calm until she reached the stairwell, where she allowed herself 30 seconds to simply breathe. That evening, Table 7, Kwon Hyun-woo's usual, though she still didn't know that name meant anything, was booked for a private meeting. Amara wasn't assigned to it. She was told, gently, to take the night off to think things over, which everyone in the building understood to mean something closer to a suspension. She was gathering her coat from the staff room when Miguel found her, breathless. "He's asking for you, Kwon Hyun-woo. He specifically asked why you weren't serving his table." "I've been suspended, Miguel." "I know, I told him that." Miguel's eyes were wide. "He wants to see you anyway." Amara straightened her uniform, unsure whether she was walking toward the end of her job or something else entirely, and went. Kwon Hyun-woo sat alone at the corner table, the same folded, unread newspaper beside him, a pot of barley tea steaming gently in front of an empty second cup, as if he had been expecting company. He gestured to the seat across from him, an act so far outside the normal order of things that Amara hesitated before sitting, glancing instinctively toward the kitchen doors as though someone might stop her. "Sit," he said, not unkindly. "I asked them to bring a second cup an hour ago. I don't like tea that's gone cold waiting for people to work up their courage." She sat. "You know who I am?" he asked. "Miguel told me your name. I don't know much beyond that, sir." "Good," he said, with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "I'd rather you answered honestly than performed respect for a title." He poured the tea himself, sliding a cup toward her. "I watched you correctly identify a 20-year-old St. Julian blind under pressure in front of a man trying to humiliate you for sport. I've sat through 11 years of business dinners with sommeliers who couldn't do that with the label in front of them." Amara said nothing, unsure where this was going. "I also watched a young man who has never once in his life had to earn anything try to destroy someone for the crime of being better than him at something that mattered," Kwon Hyun-woo continued. His voice remained even, but something colder moved beneath it now. "And I watched this restaurant suspend you for it rather than him. That tells me a great deal about how this city still works. It does not tell me anything I didn't already know." "May I ask why you're telling me this, sir?" He studied her for a long moment. "Because Baek Do-hyun is not simply a rude young man who insulted a waitress over wine, Miss Okafor. He's currently trying to force an illegal, expedited eviction of 41 small shopkeepers in Itaewon, many of them immigrants, several of them from your part of the world, using permits his father bribed through a city official's office. I have been building the paper trail on that particular arrangement for 3 months. I did not expect the final piece of evidence to be a corked bottle of wine and a man too arrogant to check his own facts before opening his mouth in public." Amara's breath caught, "The conversation I overheard at the table about the groundbreaking." "You heard it." "Some of it. I didn't think it was my place to." "It was exactly your place," Kwon Hyun-woo said, sharper now though not at her. "It is everyone's place when they witness power abusing the people who have none to abuse it with." He reached into his jacket and produced a plain white card, sliding it across the table. "I run an investment fund, Miss Okafor. I also, less publicly, chair an oversight board that audits construction and rezoning contracts for corruption on behalf of 3 separate ministries. I do this quietly because loud men make careless enemies. I am rarely wrong about people. I was not wrong about you." Word of what happened next moved through Seoul's business circles the way certain kinds of weather move through a city, slowly at first, and then all at once. 2 weeks later, at a press conference that Baek Construction had scheduled to announce the Itaewon groundbreaking, journalists arrived expecting photographs of Baek Sang-chul in a hard hat with a ceremonial shovel. Instead, they found a stage flanked by lawyers from the city's anti-corruption office, a folder of falsified permit approvals projected onto a screen behind the podium, and Kwon Hyun-woo standing quietly at a microphone, reading dates, names, and wire transfer amounts in the same unhurried voice he'd used to order tea. Baek Do-hyun was named directly, not as the architect of the bribery which had been his father's doing, but as the executive who had personally pressured the permitting office to move faster than legally allowed, using threats against a mid-level clerk's career that were, unfortunately for him, recorded on the building's own security audio. The eviction notices were frozen within 72 hours. 3 of Baek Construction's development partners withdrew from the project by the end of the month, citing reputational concerns. Baek Sang-chul, facing a formal ministry investigation, quietly removed his son from every board position the young man had held, effective immediately, and issued a public apology that named no one specifically but satisfied no one either. Do-hyun disappeared from the society pages for the better part of a year. When he resurfaced, it was in a much smaller article, buried near the back of a business daily about an entry-level compliance role at a mid-sized firm, the kind of job his father's name could still secure him, but no longer the kind that came with a driver and a corner office and the assumption that the world owed him deference. None of the articles mentioned Amara by name. That had been her request. "You could have let them use your name," Kwon Hyun-woo said, weeks later over the same corner table, the same pot of barley tea, though now she sat there not as a suspended waitress hopping to keep her job but as something closer to a guest. "It would have made you famous, vindicated publicly in front of everyone who watched him humiliate you." "I didn't do it to be vindicated," Amara said. "I did it because it was true and because those shopkeepers didn't deserve to lose their shops over a groundbreaking ceremony." She turned her teacup slowly in her hands. "Being right quietly is still being right, sir. I don't need an audience to know it happened." Kwon Hyun-woo watched her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his careful, patient eyes. "The Silver Crane has offered you your position back, with an apology and a raise, I'm told, though I suspect that was Suh's idea and not corporate's." "I know I turned it down." His eyebrows lifted, the first genuinely surprised expression she'd seen on him. "May I ask why?" "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life being the woman who survived a bad night at a rich man's table," Amara said. "I want to be the person who built something, the way my mother always told me I could if I was patient enough and stubborn enough to outlast the people who underestimated me." She met his eyes. "I studied wine on my days off for 2 years because I loved it, not because I thought it would save me one day. I'd like to actually use it, properly. Somewhere that doesn't require me to prove I belong every single night." Kwon Hyun-woo set down his cup, and this time the smile reached his eyes fully. "I happen to be opening a small, very quiet consulting arm this year, advising restaurant groups and hotel chains on wine programs, staff training, service standards, the kind of work that rewards precisely the sort of quiet excellence this city likes to pretend it doesn't have room for." He slid a second card across the table, different from the first. "I'd like you to run it." Amara looked at the card for a long moment before she picked it up. A year later, the Silver Crane had a new wine director, hired away, with considerable irony, from Kwon Hyun-woo's consulting firm, at the restaurant's own desperate request after two competitors adopted her staff training program and began outperforming them in reviews. Amara returned on her own terms this time, not as staff pleading to keep a job, but as an outside expert the owners had begged to consult, walking through the same dining room where a man had once told her to go back to where she came from, now teaching a room full of nervous young servers how to hold a glass to the light and trust what their own senses told them. "The wine will tell you the truth," she told them, echoing something her mother used to say about people, not bottles, back in Lagos on evenings that felt very far away now and also somehow very close. "Your job is only to have the courage to say what you taste." Outside, the Han River caught the last light of evening, and somewhere across the city, in an office far smaller than the one he'd once occupied, Baek Do-hyun sat filling out compliance reports, learning slowly, painfully, the way most people only learn, what it cost to mistake cruelty for power, and what it meant to finally, quietly, have to earn something for the first time in his life. Amara didn't think of him often anymore. She thought instead of the shopkeepers in Itaewon whose doors were still open, of the young servers she trained who no longer flinched when a wealthy guest raised his voice, and of her mother's voice, somewhere in memory, telling her that dignity was never loud and never needed to be real. She raised her glass that evening, not to a toast, not for anyone watching, just for herself, alone at the counter after closing, and smiled quietly at how far patience had carried her.